we have the possibility to listen to watch it again. So this is it. Once again, thank you. And I think we will start. This webinar, next slide, would be bilingual in English and French. So depending on the language that you are the most comfortable with, just select your language. Si vous êtes plutôt à l'aise avec l'expression française, vous pouvez aller directement sur le bas de votre application, sélectionner l'icône avec le globe et choisir la langue que vous préférez le mieux, soit l'anglais, soit le français. Et bien sûr, si vous avez des difficultés, pour cela, n'hésitez pas à écrire dans le chat. Nous nous ferons un plaisir de vous apporter une assistance à cet effet. Voilà. Once again, thank you. Merci à tous ceux qui se connectent. Si vous le souhaitez, vous pouvez dans le chat vous présenter, donner votre nom, le lieu d'où vous êtes en train de nous écouter et peut-être également votre organisation et votre fonction. Voilà, relativement. If you like, you can write your name, the location you are in, your organization, just for networking purposes. So that's it. That's it. Next. My name is Baba Dodo, and I'm a senior consultant at Strategies. And together with my colleague Kawala, who is the CEO of Strategies, we will be moderating this webinar for you. Next. Speaking of Strategies, we are a consulting firm specialized in leadership and management. We are based in Douala, Cameroon, and we have a branch office in Washington, D.C., USA. We have over 31 years of experience providing services to enterprises, development organizations, and regional institutions here in Africa, in Europe, and in the US. Within the mining sector, we have over 12 years of experience working on governance and management systems with organizations such as the Kimberley Process, Civil Society Coalition, or the International Conference for the Great Lakes region. We are not experts in mining, that's for sure, but we are experts in governance and organizational development. We manage processes and provide methodology for difficult and complex conversations, and we help these organizations, these institutions, building the systems they operate in. And next, for this webinar, as you see on the agenda, we will be together for 2 hours. We are still doing the introduction of this webinar, but right after that, we will be setting the scene with the trends in the mining sector. And then we will have the discussion with our panel of experts that I will introduce to you in a few moments. And then we will have the floor for the discussion with the audience before we conclude the webinar. Now, talking about the experts, we have with us this afternoon Adam Anthony. He is the Executive Director of Akirasilimali in Tanzania. You will have the chance to meet and to see him in a few moments. We also have with us this afternoon Ms. Joyce Nyamukunda. She is the Extractives Program Unit Lead at the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Organization. She is also a member of the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition. We also have with us Dr. Michael Franzak. He is a senior researcher in multilateralism and global governance at the United Nations University Center for Policy Research in USA. And finally, we have with us Ms. Nyaradzo Mutonhori. She is the program lead for Impact in Zimbabwe. These are our experts. If we were in a room in person, I would have asked you just to join me and to give them a round of applause because they've accepted to be with us this afternoon. But since this is not possible and we are here on the virtual mode, I would just ask you if you can to click on the button applause to welcome our experts. Now that we know our experts, let's open the floor for the scene to be set regarding the trends in mining for governance. And for that, I will hand over to my colleague, Frank Issy. He is a senior consultant at Strategies as well, and he will be the one to take us through these trends. Frank Issy will be speaking in French. Remember that I told you we are a bilingual, we will be bilingual this afternoon, and then he will be presenting this in French. So over to you, Frank.
Thank you, Baba. Merci. Bon après-midi à toutes et à tous. J'espère que les gens ont le temps de se connecter. Je vais effectivement introduire cette discussion importante sur la gouvernance minière en présentant de façon non exhaustive quelques tendances dans le secteur minier. Donc, il est très important déjà de savoir que l'Afrique, en tant que continent, est une des régions les plus riches du monde en ressources minérales stratégiques. Pourtant, malgré cette richesse, elle reste l'une des régions qui capte le moins de valeur économique de ces ressources. Aujourd'hui, le sujet dont nous allons discuter, la gouvernance minière, est devenu central pour plusieurs raisons. D'abord, la transition énergétique mondiale. Ensuite, la compétition géopolitique pour les minéraux critiques. La pression croissante des communautés locales qui exigent leur part des richesses de leur pays. Et enfin, la nécessité pour les États africains de transformer leurs ressources naturelles en développement durable. Dans cette présentation, je vais partager quelques tendances majeures qui caractérisent aujourd'hui la gouvernance minière en Afrique. Elles permettront d'avoir une idée des réalités, une idée des opportunités, surtout des défis structurants du secteur. La première tendance concerne le poids stratégique de l'Afrique dans l'économie minière mondiale. Quelques chiffres suffisent pour comprendre cette importance. L'Afrique représente effectivement aujourd'hui environ 30% des réserves mondiales de minerais critiques, plus de 70% de la production mondiale de cobalt, principalement en SADC, plus de 60% de la production mondiale de manganèse et environ un quart de la production mondiale d'or. Ces ressources sont aujourd'hui essentielles pour plusieurs industries clés, notamment les batteries électriques, les technologies numériques, la transition énergétique, les semi-conducteurs. Mais il subsiste un paradoxe fondamental. Malgré cette richesse exceptionnelle, l'Afrique capte moins de 10% de la valeur finale des chaînes de transformation des minéraux. Autrement dit, l'Afrique extrait beaucoup, mais elle transforme très peu, ce qui conduit au fait qu'elle capte donc très peu de valeur économique. Donc, la première tendance et la première conclusion, c'est que la gouvernance minière est l'un des défis centraux pour cette période pour les pays africains. Un second aspect à regarder, c'est le type d'entreprise qui opère dans le secteur minier. On peut dire que la tendance majeure qui émerge, c'est le fait que la structure du secteur minier africain est duale. Nous avons d'un côté l'industrie minière formelle et de l'autre, le secteur artisanal. Pour le secteur minier formel, ce secteur est dominé aujourd'hui par de grandes entreprises internationales. Il est caractérisé par des investissements en capital très élevés, des revenus fiscaux importants pour les États, des emplois qualifiés mais relativement limités en volume et un respect partiel, voire même très partiel, des normes environnementales et sociales internationales en vigueur. Cependant, ces projets miniers industriels sont souvent associés à un rapatriement important des profits, d'une part, et une faible transformation locale des minerais. D'un autre côté, quand on regarde l'exploitation minière artisanale, il est beaucoup plus vaste qu'on ne le pense. Parce qu'en effet, aujourd'hui, en Afrique, c'est environ 10 millions de personnes qui travaillent directement dans l'exploitation artisanale et près de 60 millions de personnes qui en dépendent indirectement. L'exploitation artisanale représente également 12 à 15% de la production mondiale d'or. Mais ce secteur est aujourd'hui marqué par plusieurs défis majeurs. Une forte informalité, des revenus très faibles pour les mineurs, une absence de protection sociale et des risques environnementaux très importants. L'un des grands enjeux pour les États africains est donc de formaliser progressivement ce secteur sans détruire les moyens de subsistance des populations. C'est ici qu'il convient quand même de préciser certaines choses. Oui, il faut certes formaliser le secteur minier artisanal, mais il faut tenir compte que les emplois qui y sont des emplois dont dépendent des personnes, dont dépendent des familles. Donc, il faut veiller à ce que ces emplois soient mieux formalisés, mieux et plus décents et ils nourrissent leurs personnes. Mais d'autre part, il faut tenir compte aussi qu'il y a des effets négatifs d'un effort de contournement de critiques qui sont souvent associées à une exploitation minière sans éthique. Par exemple, dans les problématiques de lutte contre les minerais de sang, si on prend le secteur du diamant, on voit que du fait des critiques, du fait du renforcement des normes à l'échelle internationale, ces dernières années, s'est développé ce qu'on appelle les minerais synthétiques. Et ces minerais synthétiques commencent à avoir un impact très important sur le marché, sur les prix d'abord, ensuite sur les revenus, et donc ça affecte les conditions de vie des acteurs africains qui travaillent dans le secteur, surtout dans le côté de la mine artisanale. Ah, on m'explique que la traduction est arrêtée. Baba, est-ce qu'on peut régler avant que je continue? Can you fix the translation?
Yeah, I think you can go ahead.
OK. Donc, c'est très important de dire donc, que le secteur minier artisanal, doit être formalisé, mais on doit faire en sorte que les Africains, les travailleurs, les communautés locales qui s'y retrouvent doivent voir leurs conditions être améliorées. Et c'est aux États africains aussi de développer des stratégies pour que les différentes stratégies à l'échelle mondiale ou à l'échelle régionale pour y arriver ne laissent pas sur le côté des travailleurs. Un autre élément important à regarder dans ce panorama du secteur minier, c'est la concentration géographique de certains minerais stratégiques. Certains pays jouent aujourd'hui un rôle déterminant. Par exemple, la République démocratique du Congo domine largement la production mondiale de cobalt. Mais la gouvernance du secteur reste fragilisée par des conflits et des défis institutionnels. On sait tout ce qui se passe dans plusieurs régions de ce pays, notamment à l'est du Congo. L'Afrique du Sud, un autre géant, possède d'importantes ressources en platine, en chrome, manganèse, mais elle fait face à des problèmes d'infrastructure et d'énergie. Le Ghana est un acteur majeur de la production d'or, mais il lutte aujourd'hui contre l'exploitation illégale appelée Galamsey. C'est une exploitation illégale de cet or et qui ruine aussi la captation de valeur par cet État. Le Botswana, qui a été souvent et longtemps cité comme un modèle de gestion des revenus du diamant, est aujourd'hui confronté, entre autres, au défi de la diversification post-diamant et de la réussite de sa transition énergétique. Des pays comme la Zambie et le Zimbabwe jouent aussi un rôle croissant. Yes?
OK, non, vas-y. Maintenant, on entend la traduction.
OK, sorry. Donc, des pays comme la Zambie, le Zimbabwe jouent un rôle croissant dans le cuivre, le lithium, mais font face à une pression croissante aussi des investisseurs étrangers qui semblent s'opposer à leur volonté d'une plus grande transformation locale des minéraux. Et enfin, des pays comme le Sénégal et le Mali, récemment, connaissent une croissance importante dans l'exploitation de l'or. Mais seulement, ils doivent faire face aussi à un environnement insécuritaire important dans la bande sahélo-saharienne. Donc, on voit donc que actuellement, cette concentration géographique amène aussi des puissances mondiales telles que les États-Unis, l'Union européenne, la Chine, à augmenter leur compétition vis-à-vis de ces pays, leur pression en vue de sécuriser leur chaîne d'approvisionnement pour les batteries et les semi-conducteurs. Alors, quels sont les facteurs explicatifs des diverses performances que l'on observe entre les pays africains en matière de gouvernance minière? Il y a plusieurs éléments qu'on peut citer, mais pour donner un aperçu rapide à ceux qui ne sont pas familiers, on dira qu'il y a bien sûr l'héritage colonial. L'héritage colonial qui a mis les pays africains dans des situations défavorables et qui ont abouti à des contrats déséquilibrés, à parfois une extraterritorialité fiscale et surtout une exploitation de leurs minerais sans stratégie industrielle nationale. On note aussi une fragilité institutionnelle chronique. Ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire que dans plusieurs pays africains, les institutions chargées de réguler le secteur minier restent faibles, avec des cadastres miniers incomplets, des inspections environnementales insuffisantes et des systèmes judiciaires lents et gangrénés par la corruption. On sait aussi que la corruption nourrit et entretient les flux illicites financiers. Les pertes liées notamment à ces flux financiers illicites de manière globale sont estimées à environ 88 milliards de dollars par an, tout secteur confondu. Et le secteur minier joue un rôle particulièrement important dans cette fuite de capitaux. Donc là aussi, les États africains accusent des déficiences qui font en sorte que une partie de la valeur est captée ailleurs. Donc, il y a aussi, bien sûr, une absence de vision stratégique intégrée dans beaucoup de pays où on voit les déconnexions entre la politique minière, la politique industrielle, la politique fiscale, et ça aboutit à une captation des bénéfices inférieure à 10% de la valeur générale qui est captée d'après cette étude. Et enfin, il y a une asymétrie criante de capacité entre les États africains et les grandes multinationales au niveau des négociations. Les États africains, notamment, manquent d'expertise technique, semblent avoir de faibles capacités et expériences en matière de négociation et ont surtout des ressources et des connaissances limitées en droit minier et en fiscalité internationale. Donc voilà autant de facteurs qui expliquent aussi que cette valeur n'est pas suffisamment captée. Next. Ça aboutit donc à ce paysage que vous voyez là. Donc, au cours des 2 dernières décennies, plusieurs initiatives internationales ont été mises en place pour améliorer la gouvernance du secteur. Et l'un des principaux instruments qui est utilisé, c'est le Resource Governance Index, qui évalue la qualité de la gouvernance des ressources naturelles. Là, vous avez un aperçu du dernier rapport où on voit entre certains pays une différence criante en termes de score. Pendant que le Sénégal plafonne à 75, suivi du Ghana, on voit que la RDC est à 36. L'indice mesure sur 100. Et les scores montrent que l'Afrique n'est pas un bloc homogène. Certains pays ont fait des progrès importants, notamment grâce à la transparence des contrats, l'amélioration de la gestion des revenus, le renforcement des institutions. Et à côté de ça, tous ces pays semblent s'inscrire de plus en plus dans des cadres internationaux importants. On peut citer l'initiative pour la transparence dans les industries extractives, les principes de l'OCDE, récemment la vision minière africaine de l'Union africaine qui a été adoptée. Et pour la région des Grands Lacs, il y a un mécanisme de certification de la conférence internationale pour la région des Grands Lacs qui concerne 12 pays et qui vise à garantir la traçabilité des minerais dans les zones de conflit. Donc, en fait, on observe que la gouvernance progresse là où les institutions nationales investissent dans la capacité de contrôle et de pilotage. S'il fallait résumer, les principaux enjeux de gouvernance minière sont liés à la captation de la valeur, à la faiblesse institutionnelle, à la compétition géopolitique qui accroît la pression sur les États et à la nécessité d'une justice sociale et environnementale. Donc, pour terminer là-bas, les pays africains se retrouvent à un carrefour. Il y a une fenêtre historique. La transition énergétique mondiale crée une opportunité sans précédent. Mais pour transformer cette dotation, ce potentiel en richesse, faudra des institutions fonctionnelles, une vision stratégique claire et un contrat social solide avec les communautés. Donc, je pense que la discussion qui va s'enclencher va entrer de façon plus précise, plus concrète sur certaines de ces problématiques en fournissant, il me semble, les éléments les plus à jour des solutions à explorer ou à approfondir. Donc, voilà, Baba, un petit aperçu. J'espère que ça permet à nos participants aujourd'hui d'avoir une idée des enjeux et des problématiques.
Yeah, thank you very much, AC, for setting the scene for us for the discussion. And I'm also sorry for our audience, which is who is English speaking, because of the quality of our connection that made the English translation a bit difficult. But what we could do is to make these trends, which are bilingual in French and English, available for you. This will be published on our website, and then you can easily download these and use them for any need. And what we will even do is to paste the link here in the chat so that you can easily download the trends now. So I was saying that I was thanking you, AC, for these trends, and now I think the floor is ready for our discussion with our panel of experts. And for that, I will introduce Ka. She will be moderating the conversation with our panelists. And remember, she is the CEO of Strategies. And of course, I'm already looking forward to the discussion. Over to you, Ka.
Thank you very much, Baba. And welcome to everybody. It's great to see all of our participants here. We have about 70 people online who are participating in the discussion. This is our first webinar of 2026. And we work on a lot of different topics at Strategies. But we think that in this moment, in the global context, and once again, our apologies because Frank did a very nice presentation of the global situation representing the potential of Africa, what we have as mineral reserves, and also the global governance challenges that we have, which he summarized to be capturing the value within Africa of our minerals. We are capturing less than 10% of the value of what we produce and export due to the fact that we do not add much value on our continent. The second major problem that he mentioned is our institutional weaknesses with deficient mining cadastres, corruption in the granting of licenses, and regulations which are poor. We are challenged with internet. I'm going to turn off my video because I see signs that maybe you're not hearing me very well. Let me turn off the video.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you.
Okay. And Frank also mentioned this moment of global geopolitical competition with the rush for critical minerals and the pressure that African countries are getting from various partners. We can take, for example, here last month in March, the US threatened Zambia with withholding development assistance for HIV unless Zambia provides more access to its critical minerals. We see the struggle right now going on in Zimbabwe for lithium. Zimbabwe is insisting that the investors in Zimbabwe add value locally. In Zimbabwe, most of their partners are Chinese in that case, and there is a tension between the Zimbabwean government and the lithium mining companies in Zimbabwe. So we are at a moment of great global geopolitical competition, and the pressure on African, and then, of course, social justice. To help us understand these problems even better, I'm going to go directly to our experts and ask them to, from their own perspectives, tell us a little bit how they see the mining challenges in Africa today. Nyaranzo, let me start off with you. You work with communities on the ground. You've been doing so for many, many years. If we were to, state what is the problem, what are the challenges, what would you say? Because the communities are the finality. We are supposed to mine, get revenue, and improve the lives of citizens and communities. Nyaranzo, over to you.
Thank you, Ka. Hello, everyone. So indeed, I've been working with mining affected communities now for some time. And currently, I am the program lead for Impact in Zimbabwe. And Impact is a Canadian-based organization that works on natural resources governance issues in areas where human rights and security are at risk. We work on responsible sourcing, supply chain transparency, tackling illicit trade, and integrating gender and environmental sustainability. And I guess these are all the problems that Frank has already highlighted as, some of the issues that then cause the communities not to benefit. And when we look and talk about the communities, we have become comfortable with, this story that is constantly being told, that communities are not heard when they participate. The information asymmetry means that communities are not able to negotiate for their rights. And in some places, they're coming from a disempowered position as communities. The systems that are there to protect the rights of communities often fail them. So why is it that we have become comfortable with such a story, particularly in the African communities? I think we need to dig deeper and say, for example, when our governments are entering these negotiations with foreign investors, they are coming from a position where currently the world is scrambling for lithium, for cobalt, for rare earth minerals, and deadlines are tight. And investors often hint that if a particular country does not allow them to get access to their resources, then they'll go elsewhere. So when we look at that, it creates a situation where there is agency, and the agency collapses the bargaining power of African states. So the deal already prioritizes speed over sovereignty. And in the end, African states systematically trade, the benefits of communities so that they can get immediate relief from these deals. The second problem that then results in communities not benefiting is where value addition is talked about, but it is not built. So, we have all been in rooms where beneficiation is a term that is repeated like a ritual. We talk about local processing, industrialization, value chains, and even the story that you told about Zimbabwe's lithium sector. When we look closely at it, we see that we have no reliable power for processing plants for lithium in Zimbabwe. Financing mechanisms for local entrepreneurs are very, scarce, and there is no coordinated industrial policy linking mining to manufacturing. This is something that Frank has already said. So the tragedy is there that the vision exists and the execution architecture does not exist. So this persistent gap between the ambition and the state capacity then prevents the countries from moving up along the value chain, leaving communities locked out of the most profitable stages of the mineral economy. The third major problem, is that when we talk about supply chains, because the value of minerals is determined in rooms, in global spaces, way before the first shovel hits the ground in the community. The value is already decided far away from where these resources are located. And when we talk about these global supply chains and trace the journey of the mineral from the lithium in Zimbabwe to a battery in an electric vehicle, Africa is there, but it is there just at the beginning and nowhere else. So Africa is not in the refining, in the advanced manufacturing, not in the ownership of the technologies driving this demand. And when we talk about these green supply chains meant to reshape the future, replicate old patterns, they still replicate the old patterns. And the continent supplies inputs and raw materials, but does not shape systems. So when the global demand rises, Africa participates, but it does not position itself to capture the transformation. And so what remains is Africa is structurally locked in at the lowest value segment of the global supply chains with limited strategic positioning in emerging industries tied to our own resources.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nyarazo. And I love the way that you have framed it, saying that it is a structural problem. We cannot expect communities to benefit. The communities benefiting is the end result. And if our countries are going into negotiations in a position of weakness, if they are, not are under pressure and in competition sometimes with one another, they enter into poor mechanisms, poor deals, poor contracts. And also, if structurally we have not organized for communities to participate, then we cannot expect to get a good end result. Madam, I'm going to go to you. If you can give us your experience. You're coming from the gold sector. You have a lot of experience in that sector. And I think also you're coming from Tanzania. Tanzania is doing maybe a little bit better than some of the rest where gold is concerned. So, again, just looking at the key challenges, the key problems, what should we learn from the gold sector as we go into this critical minerals rush?
Thank you, Ka. And so maybe just to start, if I can give an overview for those who might not be very familiar with the extractive industry in Tanzania. So one, as of last year, the mining sector contributes about 10% of our gross domestic product. So that's about 10.1 of our GDP. And that has gone up from about 3.4% in 2007, 2008. So in just about nine years, a contribution of the mining sector has almost tripled in Tanzania. It is also one of the sectors that is growing rapidly after tourism at 16.6%. Tanzania in total mines about 40 mineral types. So about 40 minerals contribute to this 10.1% GDP that I talked about. And it is also the biggest share of our foreign export. In 1997, so slightly about 20 something years, it was around 1% of our exports. Now, the mining sector contributes to 52% of our export. Now, to a larger part, the mining sector contribution, as I said, about 40 mineral types, but the larger contribution comes from the gold sector. And Tanzania's mining journey, has changed over time. So in the 1990s, Tanzania's mining sector was largely state-led, with institutions such as the state mining corporations. In the 1990s, during the wave of liberalization and privatization, it was when also Tanzania started opening up its mining sector. In 2017, things also started changing again because Tanzania started looking into its fiscal and legal frameworks and decided that we need to get more out of the mining sector than what we're already getting. So the largest changes in the mining sector in Tanzania took place in 2017. And we could go into that very deeply, but I want to point out two things that worked very well and the two things that haven't worked very well. So one of the major changes in our legal structure that governs the mining sector, and it happened in 2017, was the change of how the state participates in the mining sector. So state participation changed considerably during the 2017 reforms because it introduced what we call a free carried interest. What it means that Tanzania moved from a purely tax-based revenue model to becoming a partner in mining operations. So essentially, what would happen is you have a multinational corporation coming to Tanzania wanting to mine, let's say, gold. And instead of, for example, starting its own subsidiary, this company will have to enter into a joint venture framework with the Tanzanian government, where the company would initially have 84% of ownership. Tanzania will have 16% of ownership, free carried interest, meaning they will not pay for that ownership. In addition, Tanzania can increase its ownership up to 50%. So at some point, the company and the country could have equal partnership in this company that mines in Tanzania. What that changes is that you're now no longer depending on just the taxes that comes from the company, but as the company grows and it earns profit, the country would also be able to get a fair share of that profit in terms of dividends because you're now a partner, not just a landlord. The second part that also changed considerably was the benefit for Tanzanians, and we could talk about the local content regulations. It changed the supply chains again considerably because it also required Tanzanian companies to be able to be part of the local ventures formed by the foreign companies. So non-indigenous companies will be required to form joint ventures with local firms with a minimum of 20% local equity. So Tanzania, since these were introduced, Tanzania has already achieved about 91% local share of total industry sales. So you're looking into service providers, you're looking into other small companies that are formed in partnership between foreign companies and Tanzanian companies. But the 2017 changes were not, all smooth. So one, of course, there was a huge regulatory shock. The 2017, for example, ban on gold and copper concentrate, it did cause a severe investor friction and legal battles for Tanzania as well. And some of the companies, for example, you could check, includes the case with Acacia Mining. Now, even though it did intend for local beneficiation, the abrupt changes also in the beginning sort of chilled the investment climate. It became really hard to invest. And there are reports that showed during that particular time how there was no any new investment in mining ventures up to a few years later. But there was also a value addition gap that we have observed over the years. So for years, Tanzania exported gold in its raw form, and only recently Tanzania has been able to achieve refining capabilities. We've got refineries now in Tanzania that can process gold up to 99% purity, but still that processed gold does not have an international certification. So the refined gold is now being bought by the Tanzanian Central Bank, which is building its own gold reserve. But to be able to sell in international market, you need to have the London Bullion Market Association certification, which only one refinery in Africa, in South Africa, has that international certification. So even though we do have refining capabilities, there are still the local refineries still do not have international certification, and some of those are still working towards it. Now, from what we have learned in the gold sector, what would be the lessons or recommendations for the critical minerals rush that we see across Africa? One, in terms of processing, many countries in Africa speak about being able to process critical minerals and stop exporting them in its raw form. I believe that Africa should be able to pursue regional beneficiation hubs, for example, East African Community or SADC-wide better precursor, for example, than every country trying to build its own under-capacity refineries. And I call them under-capacity because you might have massive refining capacity, but you do not have enough feedstock to be able to refine. Number two is the state participation beyond free carried interest. And I spoke about it, that free carried interest, 16% ownership for Tanzania has worked very well, but it needs to be able to use that advantage more than just being able to get interest, but to use that to be able to put experts on these boards of the companies that can influence technology transfer, for example, but also responsible mining standards for these companies, rather than just treating being an equity partner as a source of revenue stream, but also as a source of advocating for responsible mining. Number three, which Tanzania is currently doing as well, is to be able to treat geological data as a public good. So Tanzania is currently funding its national geological surveys to be able to map out and explore Tanzania up to 50% geological surveys by 2030. Currently, the Tanzanian geophysical survey has been done only at 16%, and the idea is to map 50% of the country by 2030. When a country owns its data, it negotiates from a position of power, because now you already know how much you have and where, and it reduces what we call exploration risk, which is usually a discount that is demanded by investors. And the last one is what we've also learned from Tanzania, and I spoke about it a few minutes ago, about Tanzania building its own gold reserve by buying gold from the local refineries. Tanzania introduced a 20% gold reserve requirement for the central bank. And I think African nations should consider having a strategic mineral reserve for critical materials to be able to hedge against one of the major problems, which is price volatility of these minerals, and to be able to ensure domestic industrial supply when it is needed. I'll put a stop there, Carl.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam, for sharing the experience from Tanzania with us. And also, you started already throwing out some recommendations, looking like solutions. But before we really talk about the solutions, let's move to Joyce. Joyce, you in Zimbabwe, and you are also a member of the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition. So from the perspective of the framework of governance, what could be the problems that we still see in the mining governance on the continent?
Thank you, Baba. So generally, most of the issues have actually been spoken to in terms of the challenges that we see. But sitting within the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition and also being part of the Kimberley Process, which is a scheme that has actually been launched around 2003 in response to the rebels that have actually been funding insurgencies through the diamond trade, in countries like Sierra Leone, Angola, Liberia. So you find that such kind of a framework, it has actually managed to reduce conflict diamond trade in its sense as that of the definition about the rebel crisis and the rebels actually funding the insurgencies. But one challenge with most of the frameworks or the governance frameworks that are actually emerging, you find that they're a bit narrow in the sense that, one, they are not really legally binding. Most of them, they are actually not conditional and they're not binding. So one may choose to or not to abide by such kind of frameworks. So looking at this kind of framework for the Kimberley Process, with what it was intended to do, it actually managed to do that. But you found that it was actually looking at today and still it's being in application, it is actually narrow for today's reality. It was actually built to stop the conflicts, like I mentioned, from links to rebel wars. But African states today, they actually face much broader problems. For example, issues around smuggling, weak traceability. We also have issues of poor labor conditions, environmental damage, community displacements, and actually limited benefit sharing. So the frameworks actually do not fully address some of the governance challenges that really matter now in the context that we are in. And then you find that within the Kimberley Process, there is the tripartite arrangement. And in that tripartite arrangement, we have government, we have companies, and we have civil society. But you find that civil society actually has limited power. And governments actually hold the real decision-making power. So that imbalance together with the institutional inertia, you find that it makes it hard to really fix some of the deeper flaws or adopt the system to new mineral governance challenges like the ones we are facing right now within the critical mineral sector. So the last challenge that I would really speak to with regards to the Kimberley Process or the frameworks generally, they lack much with regards to issues of transparency, accountability. They are very weak because they actually relies more in terms of self-policing. Like the KP, it actually relies heavily on governance, certifying governments, actually certifying their own compliance without strong independent audits or public reporting, which actually creates that conflict of interest because the states actually benefit from the diamond exports from what we have actually been seeing. So they have that very little incentive to actually expose some of the problems. And the result is actually a system that can actually become even more about certification on paper than the real accountability that we are looking for in practice. So these are some of the challenges or three key problems that I'll just highlight looking at some of the frameworks that we have sitting from the Kimberley process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joyce. So for sharing this perspective from the KP, the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition position. And we see that even though the framework was defined as something that could bring solution, a sustainable solution, it didn't solve all the problems on the ground. So we still see many challenges as we move on. Now I will move to Dr. Michael van Zak. You are actually focusing on the frameworks that would enable a good negotiation between the selling countries and the producing countries. And you're going to talk about the asymmetry within these negotiations. So what could be considered as the key challenges from your perspective?
Thank you for that, Baba, and thank you, Ka, for bringing us all together this morning over here in New York. It's really great to speak to everyone. I will try to be brief. I'm speaking humbly today. I'm not an expert on mining, but I'm an expert on global governance. So I'm here to share a bit about what I see in the UN and to learn from the panelists and others. So for the UN, critical minerals governance is happening, but it's largely happening outside the UN. That is not at a multilateral level. As you all know, consumers are moving very rapidly to protect their interests. In just the last year, we've had all sorts of new, very concrete initiatives from the EU, from the US and the Quad, and all of these new vehicles that consumer governments are coordinating to protect their interests. Critical minerals in the last couple of years have become absolutely central to global North countries' national security policies, to their industrial policies, and to the AI economy. And how I see this, it really are essential to the next several decades of their prosperity and their safety. The risk, or one of the risks, as I see it, is that it's possible to have a green and a digital transition in rich countries that is built on the backs of poor countries, because the value add is not happening at the local level, and the wealth is leaving the country or staying in a very, very small elite group. In other words, the present will rhyme with the past. That's what we really need to avoid. So I just want to highlight three major governance challenges that I think have not received enough attention in my circles. What's very encouraging is that it's of course, front and center in these discussions. So first, our global governance models for critical minerals are outdated. I'll give a couple examples. There's been talk from an International Investors Commission and from the Club of Rome for an International Minerals Agency modeled after the International Energy Agency. This was the IEA has been very active this year and was created in 1974 by consumer countries and for consumer countries to ensure their access and prices. It was a stockpiling and coordination agreement to protect them. So if we're adapting that model today, I think it deserves a serious rethink. Another is a binding global treaty, and member states, several member states have put this forward. It's been a difficult push, and I think it's a very valuable thing, but a very steep political climb. More voluntary initiatives have been proposed. There are new frameworks coming out of the UN and coming out of civil society, but that that binding element that's so difficult to achieve is not there. And as Joyce pointed out, this is something that's missing from the Kimberley process and other schemes. Second is that global rules inhibit effective value add. I'll give an example from outside Africa, which is Indonesia several years ago introduced a provision that said if you want to mine nickel in Indonesia, you have to do some of the refining here. And Indonesia was sued and taken to WTO. Court ruled against Indonesia, saying it was against WTO rules. So that's another challenge that African states will have in pursuing effective value add strategies is that global rules are set for another time and not very responsive. And finally, Frank has mentioned this, others have touched on it too. Adam had some great comments on this. The vast power asymmetries in negotiations, and that runs a few different directions. It runs with consumer governments. It runs with multinational mining companies. It is seen in arbitration and courts when deals are being challenged. And it's seen in mapping the mineral wealth of countries where mining companies and big consumer countries have vast advantages in technology and drone and surveillance that they can suck up a lot of data and position themselves in a very advantageous position relative to governments. Changing this, and I think this is another challenge that we can discuss, will take financing in addition to politics. And I have a couple ideas around both of those, but I'll save those for the next session or the next part of the webinar.
Go round, yes. Thank you very much, Michael, for this. What I take away from your first intervention is that the models that we use for the mining governance are outdated. They are not no longer like responsive to the needs, to the challenges that we just discovered, that we just heard of from Adam, from Joyce, from Nyaratzo, and so on. So now, what could be the solutions? What could be the solutions to guide us through this? Let me just remind you of this this framework that Ka told you about in the beginning of this webinar. She talked about the functionality framework that we developed here at Strategies, and I would just briefly remind you about that framework because it will guide us through the discussion on the solution. So it's a framework for governance that we were able to develop based on the over 20 to 30 years of experience within the field of governance that we had at Strategies. So basically the idea is that governance is something that is produced, which is guided, which is developed by key architects. These are the three: the state, the private sector, the civil society. Of course, in Africa, we have a fourth one that we could consider really instrumental, which is the development actors. But these key architects, they all they all intervene at three levels of functionality. The first one is the presence. Sometimes we are seeing challenges in Africa because at a specific, within a specific space of the country, the state is not present. So he will not be able to provide the services that are necessary for the well-being of the citizens. So is one of these key architects present and effectively delivering This is the first level. The second one is safety and sustainability. Do we have a framework? Do we have a legal framework that kind of pave the way for the actions to be carried out? And finally, do these activities, do these services really produce hope, and are they future ready for the people, for the citizens to feel comfortable within the countries? So this is, in a nutshell, what we consider as the concept or the framework of functionality within the field of governance. So with this, I will going to ask to each of you these questions regarding the solution. So for you, what do you think should be done? First of all, at the level of the government, like the state actor, for us to bring about solutions to the challenges that we just developed. I see you have your mic, your camera open already, Nyaratso, so maybe I will start with you.
Thank you. So at the level of the state, it is important that states, African states in particular, especially when we talk about the rush for critical minerals, they do not negotiate on their own, but that they should come together. So for example, if we look at the DRC, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and imagine investors negotiating with that regional bloc of countries, this builds the bargaining power, and it also helps to decouple the immediate fiscal pressure from the resource negotiations. And this helps African countries from rushing in terms of the race to the bottom. And when we look internally within our own African states governance, most of the standards are coming from outside towards us. And it is also a high time that we sit down and improve our institutional, policy, and legal frameworks and strengthen them such that we are able to demand accountability within our own countries. We are able to curb illicit trade. We are able to strategically monitor how our resources are being used. And I think I like the example, again, when it comes to the data, we are not even in control of the geological information in our own countries. But when we look at the Tanzanian example, I think the most important thing there is that that country is now in control of its geological data. And this really strengthens the bargaining power of that country in terms of it getting more benefits from the investors. So let me end there at the state level in terms of what the state can do to ensure that the benefits are realized by the communities. I was going to continue and speak about, let's talk about the strengthening our infrastructure so that we are able to speak about beneficiation, not just in theory, but when we talk about beneficiation, we are then following it up with infrastructure development plans, with budgets, and making sure that our national budget is speaking to the plan to beneficiate so that we are able to address that tragedy where we have a vision to beneficiate, but we don't have the infrastructure to be able to do it. So let me end there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nyaradzo. We should see how within the country's states make sure that the infrastructure are present and effective for the beneficiation to be captured, to be ensured. I'd like to come to you, Adam, because I still have in mind this the case of Tanzania, and because we said it's not possible for every state to go alone, to find solutions alone on such a topic. So how could we perceive things going in a more collaborative way between several states? It's up to you to see how you can develop that. Thank you.
Thanks, Baba. So maybe let me start from where you have stopped about how can we go about it. And I think my proposal was that instead of each country wanting to build a refinery, I think the idea was to be able to process some of these critical minerals, which requires massive scale, not just energy, but also industrial capacity, to be able to do this at a regional level. We already have economic blocks within African continent. You already have the East African community. You already have the SADC region. We're already moving towards the Africa continent, the free trade area, and all these economic blocks and initiative that, vision to connect the continent are not of use if we can't connect economically. Even though most of the countries in the region have access and huge deposit of critical minerals, we all have different comparative advantages to when it comes to economics. Tanzania, for example, has a long coastline, so it is better placed, for example, as a transportation hub. DRC has many of the deposits and a huge amount of many of the deposits. So perhaps it might be a location where you want to put a refinery. So I'm looking at which country within the region would be better placed to play a certain role, a refinery, a transportation hub, or value addition hub. So that's what I'm saying, that a regional hub for different levels of the supply chain might be ideal, rather than every country trying to become a transportation hub, trying to become, a refinery hub and everything in between. So that will be my first look, that connect the countries and have regional strategies than one country strategy. The second part is I wanted to look into, so there have been like a trend of many countries putting export bans on different critical minerals. And I think ideally, instead of putting abrupt export bans, I think the idea was to be able to use what I call a sliding scale royalties. And we've used this in gold, for example. The gold, the Central Bank of Tanzania has given incentives for gold, for example, that is refined in Tanzania, within the Tanzania refineries, get a reduction in royalty from 6% to 4%, and many other incentives as well. If you use incentive-led beneficiation than export bans, we're more likely to achieve more than ban that doesn't benefit anybody, not the buyer, not the seller. For example, lower royalty rates can be applied to minerals that have been processed up to an intermediate or final stages. So, for example, battery-grade nickel sulfate when it comes to critical minerals. And then if you're exporting raw critical minerals, then maybe your royalty rates will be higher. So that's an idea of moving from export bans to a policy that works for both parties, the buyers and the sellers. And the last part, of course, I work in the extractive industry, so I have to stress on transparency. And I think one of the, in addition to reforms that happened in Tanzania in 2017, I think one of the other pillars that have helped to enforce the reforms that happened in 2017 was that Tanzania being part of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, which has a set of requirements for a country that is a member of a EITI. So, for example, being able to publish some of the terms, I will not say some of the contract, but some of the terms that exist within the contract, to be able to publish the data that we can now use to be able to build argument, but also data that is available for public scrutiny to check how much revenue is being contributed by the mining sector, the mining companies, employment, local content. All this data is important to be able to make informed decision. And this data would not otherwise be available if Tanzania was not, for example, part of EITI. So as part of the ongoing governance improvement, I believe that if a country is part of EITI, and in addition to that, many other international frameworks, especially on transparency. That helps to consolidate legal and fiscal requirements because now they are public, they're known, and they can be scrutinized and improved over time. Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. So basically, countries have to apply good governance. They also need to collaborate together. They also need within their own, within their boundaries, within their own territory, ensure that the infrastructure is available for mining to be well practiced. So we've seen a bit this view of what the state could do. And I'm coming to you, Joyce, because state is not the only architect. We have also two others with also the support from the development actors. So what could be done in terms of solution for better collaboration? Still speaking from your experience within the KPCS, the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition. Thank you.
Thanks, Baba, for this. And critically for me is whatever we are doing, I'll start with the governments. Whatever policy, whatever system, whatever process that they put in place or whatever that they're trying to do, what is really important is the delivering them delivering local benefits. Because I'm just looking at it to avoid that trap of creating a seal with no upside for communities, like what happened with the Kimberley Process. Critical mineral governance actually should really tie compliance to concrete outcomes. We talk of tax incentives, tax revenues for schools, local processing plants, as has been mentioned earlier on. So Africa's policies already prioritize issues of beneficiation and jobs. But looking at what we have actually been urging and calling for as the civil society coalition within the Kimberley Process is regulation should actually be accompanied by responsible mining practices, which is really key. And you find that within the Kimberley Process, there has been the formation of the Frame 7, the Diamond Frame 7, which actually focuses on issues of responsible mining and promotes responsible mining. But what has actually been lacking is that implementation or domestication at the national level, which really sits back again with the local, with the African governments. So what I'm really seeing is we have a number of initiatives at the regional, international, national level. But what's really lacking is the commitment and political will by government to actually be able to implement and also employ some of these. We actually have the Responsible Mining Initiative, the IRIMA, the OECD guidelines, amongst others, which we can actually employ. And then you find that at that level of having these frameworks being created, we also have, looking at the critical minerals, the UN panel that has actually been created. It is mainly involving the international NGOs, but we are actually also replicating the same system within the Kimberley Process where we have, yes, we have the civil society coalition, but where is the space for communities? We want also communities to really be on the forefront and be able to have their voices amplified beyond having representatives that actually focus or represent their issues. And I think it is important, both civil society, government, private sector, to really not be, rigid. There's need for continuous improvement and embedding flexibility. We have seen from Kimberley Process, there has been really a stagnation since its formation, and it hasn't really served its purpose. Where it was supposed to broaden the mandate, there have been some reforms, but they didn't really came through. So the critical mineral governance actually require governance that actually covers all conflict and responsible mining issues, from violent conflicts, looking at human rights, and environmental rights. The Africa's own mining vision actually emphasizes this. For example, it calls for the free, prior, informed consent, progressive fiscal regimes, and also respect for human and environmental rights. So regulations for critical minerals should actually be similarly mandatory to protect on land rights, water, pollution, among other issues. Lastly, issues of enforcement are really critical, especially enforcing transparency and traceability. Right now, we are grappling with the diamonds, looking at the context, the emergence of the synthetic diamonds. Why? Because it is actually now taking over the market. They have no traceability issues. They have no issues of, the labeling of blood diamonds, among other issues. So what can we learn from this? We need to really enforce and have transparency and accountability and also traceability issues. Whatever framework, whatever policies that we put in place, they actually need to be backed by strong auditing and data transparency. We have in some countries policies that have actually been put in place, but implementation and enforcement is a challenge. So we need to really learn on that so that we actually be able to enforce traceability and not keep the data secret, like what has been happening within what is actually happening within the Kimberley process. So critical mineral regimes should actually publish monitoring results and also chain of custody information. So the independent third parties, like I mentioned, on like the OECD, the IRIMA standards, should actually be able to help all stages of the supply chain with regards to some of those issues. I think for now, this is what I'll have to submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joyce. Thank you for bringing this on the table, the issue of the political will. So it's not only about the technical expertise, it's not only about the availability of funds, finances, but it's also about the political will. Do we want this to be happening on the field? How do we see this? And this is probably another layer of the complexity that we see on this field. Before I come to you, Michael, I just want to let our participants know that they can ask questions, they can write on the chat. I see there are some questions already, and we will cover this in a few moments after Michael's coming in. So let me come to you. You announced that you have some solutions and you are keeping them for this round. Now it's over to you.
Thank you, Baba. Happy to kick us off. And I'll just note a favorite quote of mine: there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And I think there are some really tough trade-offs to think through with critical minerals. First, I want to say, I work for the UN. I believe that the multilateral approach is very valuable, but we can't wait for it because things are moving so fast and the politics are so big. So I agree with a lot of what Adam had said about the value of regional and sub-regional cooperation, especially through these structures that already exist, and the value of focusing on negotiations. And I'll give a couple lessons now from the sovereign debt process that I think are potentially relevant here. What we saw in the 2000s around sovereign debt governance was a strong push for new global binding institutions, a strong political push. And out of that push came a number of valuable things. So first, the collective action clauses from the early 2000s is when these started to spread. A collective action clause binds all creditors to a restructuring based on a supermajority vote, and it was meant to prevent holdout creditors. So, I can imagine this kind of principle being applied in contracts where one lender or investor can't stop a restructuring or a changing of the terms of the deal. And if you have a coalition and maybe unique arrangements around who can be at that table, if you can include CSOs, then I think you can have a different agenda and the power to influence it. The second is the African Legal Support Facility. I think it's important to remember came out of the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative in 2008. The issue was vulture funds. These funds that would come in and buy distressed debt very, very cheap, and subsequently make the management of that debt very difficult for the country. So the African Legal Support Facility was created with the African Development Bank support to support countries in those debt negotiations and restructurings. So I can imagine, and I believe there are institutions like the African Legal Support Facility doing this for critical minerals, but providing direct on-hands support and exchanging best practices, but going beyond that to include technology transfer model agreements. Adam has mentioned a lot of the really important things that Tanzania is doing, including he let me know about a database that they have of model contracts. So I think what it shows, what the sovereign debt shows, is that not only that changes in the rules of the game pay more in the long term, but that these institutional and legal models can spread quite rapidly and effectively when they're backed by political pressure. The last example I'll give is climate resilient debt clauses or pause clauses. And these have really taken over in multilateral finance in the last couple of years. Before that, they were virtually non-existent. When they were introduced a couple of years ago, starting with the World Bank, creditors were initially not very happy and a little concerned. Lo and behold, the World Bank introduced it, backdated it to many loans, and creditors did just fine. Markets did not freak out. Since then, regional MDBs have adopted pause clauses and included them in their lending, and now it's becoming a pretty standard part of sovereign debt contracts and of the sovereign debt governance space. I think the African Green Mineral Strategy is definitely a really important move in this direction. As Naya said, the vision exists, and it's a quite sophisticated one, but the capacity does not, or is lagging behind. But I think that Africa has provided a really, really critical leadership right now. I see the African Green Mineral Strategy, from my seat in the UN as representative of a larger assertion of African leadership and agency at the regional and global level. I see this in New York with the African Group's leadership in the tax convention process, in the financing for development process, specifically around sovereign debt, and on climate governance in the last couple of years through things like the Nairobi Declaration, where Africa has taken a very bold and forward position on climate finance. So I think there's a lot of potential at the contract level, and at this moment in particular, for changing the rules of the game, because I think it's both possible and more effective in the long term. But I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So we see that there is a room for improvement to make things better in terms of contracting between sellers and buyers on the continent. We see that there's also a room for improvement in terms of political pressure, in terms of political will, in terms of countries tapping the states, increasing its own engagement for the citizens in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of collaborating with other states to create these hubs and so on. So there are several things that are possible to do to make mining to make this new rush, this current rush for critical minerals, different from what we've encountered in the past. So now, as I was saying, I will come to our participants to see whether they have questions to our experts. I see already here in the chat, there's a question from Mr. Leonard Orondo. So he says, I feel the AU, the African Union, should be taking a lead in such things. We've talked about the models, the global models, the regional ones. We talked about the negotiations, the framework that would ensure more equitable exploitation. So he sees the AU as a great leader for such things. But it's very disappointing this is not the case. So AU is not really doing this. So his question to you guys is, do we really need the AU? Do we really need these regional institutions, these regional bodies to kind of facilitate these processes? What do you think? It's up to you, whoever wants to start. Maybe, should I come to you, Adam?
Again? Could you ask the question again?
Sorry, the question was, do we really need the AU? Is AU still something that we should consider when we talk about these global frameworks that would ease the process in terms of negotiations, in terms of rules and regulations to be implemented, in terms of creation of these hubs between countries to ensure that mining is well done? Do we still need the AU?
Very quickly, Baba, I believe we do. And I mean, because I'm a believer of multilateralism as opposed to bilateral deals that African countries have been signing with the US, with the EU. I think African countries have a better negotiation power when they come in as a bloc, as opposed to coming in as a single country. And coming in as a bloc, it is easier, or it is better facilitated using the economic blocks that we already have. They already have a structure, they already have leadership, and they have already been integrated in, different countries' governing structure. So, for example, the East African Community, and I gave also the SADC region as well. Meaning, if you want, for example, to build a processing hub within the SADC region, all these countries are already part of a community that they have agreed to the terms and how it operates. So I do believe that we need the African Union to be able to facilitate regional engagement, continental engagement. And I know the reason why most of us sometimes lose faith in the continental institution, it is because of how long it takes to be able to decide, or how long it takes to be able to reach a consensus amongst the countries that are part of that economic bloc. But I still believe that we do need that. But when there is an opportunity to be able to take an advantage of an investment or advantage of an opportunity, then I believe that countries can come together and be able to, to work on the sidelines of African Union. I mean, I don't think that hurts anybody. If Zambia, DRC, and Tanzania have first tried to work within the frameworks of AU and feel that it is not working, or it's taking too long to decide, and I think several countries can decide to move on, and African Union will catch up later. But I am not a believer of every single country acting on its own.
Okay, thank you very much. So we still need the AU. cover
Yeah.
this. Yeah,
Thanks,
Nyarato.
Baba. I just wanted to add and say, we have the Africa Mining Vision. Since 2009, that document has really shifted, the mining sector to say all these ideas we are now talking about value addition and beneficiation. Clearly, the Africa Mining Vision said this in 2009. Africa should stop being just a supplier of raw materials and should start capturing the full value. We also have, through the African Union, the Green Mineral Strategy. So yes, for the longest time, all these instruments are there at the AU level. What is lacking is, the implementation. And, right now, as we speak, how many countries now have country mining visions? Very few. There is limited uptake. Yet these are the very issues that are at the core of the problems that we are discussing today. So it's still relevant, and I agree with Adam that let's keep using the African Union and continue to work with the African Union where possible to shape integration on the continent. Yeah.
Thank you, Nyarato. I saw you were ready to come in, Joyce.
Thank you, Baba. Just to comment that I also share I share the frustration from the person who asked the question. But I think the problem is not that Africa really actually lacks, minerals or importance, but it is that we are still mainly negotiating from a fragmented position. So I still feel the African Union remains necessary. So the issue is not whether we need the AU, but whether we are making it work as a true collective bargaining platform. So Africa actually needs to really stand on one voice on issues of standards, value addition, transparency, and also issues of community benefits. Otherwise, we continue to be divided and weaker at the global level. So yeah, yes, I really feel we need the AU, but we also need to just strengthen it in terms of resourcing it, demanding that it actually moves from symbolism to issues of strategic leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. And lastly, Michael.
Yes, thank you. I too am a strong believer in multilateralism, and I think the AU is a very important institution, but it's not the only one. And I would suggest exploring a multi-layered approach. I want to tell a little bit about something going on at the UN that very interesting from my perspective. I'm an historian, and it's about sovereign debt and a debate that had gone on for decades. I had mentioned this push for a sovereign debt mechanism, and it had been resisted and resisted and resisted since the 1970s. Well, there was a breakthrough of sorts last year in New York in the financing for development process. This is where the SDGs came from. Countries agreed to pursue a process leading toward the creation of a borrower's forum. So we have creditor coordination, long have had it through the Paris Club. Private banks have cooperated through the London Club. No such cooperation forum exists for debtors. Until now, this is a process that started, and lots of details will need to be worked out and what exactly it's going to do. But one of the key features is that it's by borrowers for borrowers. So if you are a net creditor, you would not sit in this borrower's forum. And I think it's a powerful example of something that developed countries have pushed back for decades and said, no, no, no. And now that it's moving forward, these countries united in favor of this, and they're doing it. Now that it's moving forward, the creditors want in because it is an important, it serves an important function, and one that would raise the profile of debtors and encourage collective action in the same way that the Paris Club and official creditors have coordinated their action. So I find that inspiring. I think it's possible and necessary. for Africa to be stronger together. But I think that could also include, thinking globally in terms of the kind of coalitions that you want to bring forward. So that was one example of a borrowers forum that, you could imagine versions of for minerals, whether specific minerals or a kind of global baseline approach. And finally, I see the comment on financing. So I just wanted to say quickly that I think this is an area where taxes and levies, I think, are actually possible when they're not possible in so many other areas. The kind of gold standard for this in multilateral finance has been unit aid, which is an organization that delivers money to life-saving treatments for HIV/AIDS. And it's funded in part by a voluntary levy that France and a number of other countries place on air travel tickets. It's a nominal fee that showed that it hasn't affected air travel demand or anything like that, but it's provided a predictable and additional source of financing for unit aid. Now, I think this would be the solidarity levy would be a tough sell in today's political climate. This would be a levy that, would be adopted in theory by both North and South. And indeed, I believe Cameroon is a member of the unit aid levy, but the majority of revenues and the leadership, the political leadership, would have to come from developed countries first, because that's where, or it couldn't take place. This levy couldn't go forward without some developed country leader. I think that'll be difficult to find. So I wanted to suggest another example that's maybe less well known, which is the International Oil Pollution Compensation Funds. And this was created in the 1970s to address a new problem, which was oil spills on the high seas that nobody was responsible for, or legally responsible, but that it was affecting everyone. It was not good for industry. It was not good for environment, not good for coastlines, not good for states. So the IOPC funds itself. It funds oil spill cleanups through an industry levy. Importers of a certain amount of tons of oil, exporters of a certain amount of tons of oil have to pay this levy. It goes into a fund, and that fund releases the money when oil spills happen. It's essentially an insurance policy, is one way to look at it for companies, but it funds these efforts. And the kind of political deal that made this possible was this insurance-style arrangement where companies are paying in, but they also have certainty that they won't receive additional litigation or liability beyond that. So when I said at the beginning about trade-offs, there's not really solutions, but there are trade-offs, and it's really about which trade-offs we value most and which are possible. And so I think this model, the IOPC, International Oil Pollution Compensation Funds, provides one example of a legally binding, automatic revenue-generating service that pays for a global public good. At the same time, you're also, to some degree, letting the oil companies or the transporters and in this case, possibly mining companies, off the hook for additional liability and litigation. So that's one example where you can have a binding effect, but you're also trading something in return. However, the last point on this is that I think if there's any space where taxes and levies for where the funds are redistributed after, if there's any place where I think it's viable, it's here, because it's so essential to the economies and national security of rich countries. I think using those political pressures could be a helpful strategy. But two precedents. So, you have two precedents for financing through taxes and levies, and you have a very recent precedent for collective action by low-income countries to increase or better the terms of sovereign debt agreements.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing with us these cases, these examples of not really solutions, but ideas to explore that could help. Yeah, thank you. It's not an easy topic to handle because it's too complex. We have several aspects to cover. And of course, on the field, the consequences are really not that simple. So we are almost at the end of this webinar. We still have less over 10 minutes to cover. So I will then ask you to think about your recommendations. We have several people that attended the meeting, the webinar, and as we are moving to the end, what could be the key takeaways that you want them to go with? What could be the recommendations if we are saying that we want mining, we want to make mining profitable for the citizens, for the states in Africa? What could be your recommendations? Maybe let me start with who wants to go first? With Joyce? I don't know why. I started with you.
Thanks,
Are you there?
Baba. Yes, I'm
Okay.
here. Sorry, I was just trying to locate my mic. Yeah, thank you for that. So for me, I think the key takeaway is sitting from the Kimberley Process legacy, which is actually a bit mixed, which showed the power of international coordination, but also, its limits when scope, transparency, and also enforcement have actually been lacking. I think it is important for African states to actually start building critical mineral governance that is built on awareness of the number of the governance gaps that we've actually talked about, so that we could actually avoid a number of pitfalls that we're actually seeing within the other schemes, or like what we have been seeing in the Kimberley Process. So in practice, what we are actually what I'm just recommending is that there's the need to actually design that broad accountable regime that actually ensures traceability, community benefits, which is really key, and also that evolving due diligence, which actually aligns with Africa's own development goals. And I think if we actually take in some of these lessons that we've actually discussed here, African governments can actually create those systems that truly make the mineral wealth work for the continent, rather than what we are actually seeing at the present moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joyce. Now let me move to you, Adam.
Thanks, Baba. I have one major recommendation, and I think in summary, it sums up everything I've talked about as an experience from Tanzania. In 2017, of course, we passed many legal provisions to reform our mining code. But I think the most important one was, I would say, was to give power back to the people through the parliament. And this was done by passing what we call, there's an act that allows the Tanzanian parliament to renegotiate some of the terms that are referred to as unconscionable terms. And the idea of passing that particular law was that in the past, in many of the mineral development agreements, you would have what they're called stabilization clauses, that you enter into a 25-year agreement, and that if anything changes in the future, it would not affect the agreement that you have gotten into. And because of that, many countries in 1990s and early 2000 entered into such agreements that have costed many of the African countries dearly. So in 2017, Tanzania, what they said is the ability to renegotiate the terms remain with the Tanzanian parliament. And if circumstances change, if the context change, then the Tanzanian people, through their parliament, have an ability to renegotiate those terms. And I think that is very key because the context in the mining governance, the benefits, the risks changes all the time. And it is very unfair to keep a country locked in a 25-year agreement and that the terms would not change. And I think that is one of the things we've got to try, that I think African countries should, when you enter into this agreement, should have legal provisions that allow them to recheck some of the contracts that African countries have entered. And this is not just about the circumstances changing. It could be a corrupt regime that gave a mining company very high incentives that are unreasonable. And when a new government has come into power, should be able to renegotiate those terms that were entered through corruption and get a better deal. I think that's one of my recommendations. Be able to renegotiate the contracts between mining companies and African governments when circumstances change.
Thank you very much. Like, to have a very flexible framework that could be changed depending on the context. So now coming back to you, Michael.
Yes, thank you, Baba. I'll just close with a few points. One, everyone in New York at the UN is talking about critical minerals. Now is the time to shape policies and shape politics and align policies. And I don't need to tell you all, but I think pursuing and scaling sub-regional bargaining and collaboration where it makes sense, where there are comparative advantages, is really essential. You are stronger together in these negotiations. The second is, I think Adam's covered very well that contracts are a pressure point. And I think there are a number of lessons to learn from other areas like sovereign debt, where you can have clauses that trigger different things, like a pause clause that pauses your interest payments in the case of a climate shock. Well, think about a sudden drop in export earnings or a crash. There should be mechanisms in place to support countries for this. And indeed, there are a few, but they need to be scaled up. And finally, there are lots of models for governance, and they don't all have to come from the critical mineral sector. What's important is that they share the DNA of the problem. And what I've talked about today, a bit of what we talked about is the problem of the vast asymmetry in negotiations. And I just saw that so clearly in the sovereign debt process. And I also saw how collective action could begin to change things. So I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael. So what I myself take away from this discussion, unfortunately, I think we lost Nyarazzo, so I will probably close here. So I take away the fact that it is important to have a collective action to kind of reduce the asymmetry within the negotiations. We have to collaborate together between countries to ensure that we have a balanced exploitation and use of our resources. in order to create hubs so that we have a win-win collaboration. We have to work together with the private sector, with the civil society, with the communities to ensure that we are all together, making sure that all interests are being taken into account. And we also have to respect, to apply good governance, transparency, to make sure that everything goes well and everyone is satisfied. Talking about the citizens here and also talking about the state itself. Yeah. With this, I'm going to thank you all. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Adam. Also, thanks to Nyaradzo for your intervention, for sharing your expertise, for sharing your knowledge about this topic, and also for taking your time to be with us this afternoon or this morning for you in New York. Michael, thank you very much. And now also thank you to our participants, attendees. You take your time to listen to this. The topic is complex, as we said in the beginning, complex conversation, difficult conversations. And then we are not sure that we've covered everything, but at least we started talking about it. As Michael said, it's very, very trendy now, this topic of critical minerals. So it's time for us to shape policy, to shape politics all along this policy, to make sure that we are all together in such a way that at the end, all the partners are satisfied, a win-win partnership. So this is what we are all looking for. And this is what we all hope to be the end goal of this new rush to critical minerals on the continent. So with this, if you want to know more about the trends that were presented in the beginning by AC, to whom I say thank you, please go to our website. The link is in the chat and you can download. If you want to discuss this further, please, the link is also there for you to make an appointment and to discuss this with us or to get linked with our experts today. What we are also willing to do is to support in case you are interested in doing this, because we said in the beginning, we are not experts in mining, but we are experts in organizational development. We are experts in processes. So we help you discuss, we help you have conversations that are complex, and we also help you building systems that could that you are operating in a sustainable way. I'm then going to say thank you. Thank you to you all. This was the first webinar, and we will probably be having others. Usually we have 3 to 5 webinars every year, so be ready to receive our invitations, our calls, our request to attend the next webinars. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful rest of your day, your afternoon, your morning, wherever you are. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
You too, bye-bye.
Thank you, Baba.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Baba.